Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Willem Meintjes from the Council for Geoscience. So I think as part of introduction to this session, I'll obviously speak from the context of the Council for Geoscience in terms of our role in contributing to enabling socioeconomic development. Obviously having a bit of a bias towards the mining industry. Although some of the work that we do are obviously contributing to socioeconomic development broadly and not specifically only to the mining industry. But nonetheless, I'll have a focus a bit more on that. So this is just a disclaimer to indicate that if you do want to use some of the contents of this presentation, you're welcome to reach out to the CGS and get our approval to make use of this, unless obviously it's cited from other sources. So maybe just by means of introduction, for those that are not aware, the Council for Geoscience, obviously we are one of the science councils of government in South Africa. So we report to the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, and the CGS had been around for quite an extensive time. We've been formally established as the Geological Survey of South Africa around 1912. And this year we are celebrating 111 years of existence. So this is quite important from our context and our point of departure, since geoscience data and information, as I'll touch on in a bit, actually forms quite a big component of the work that we do, especially legacy and historical information. And then with the advent of new technologies and innovation, we obviously can build on that and also contribute to socioeconomic development. And I'll touch a bit on that in a minute. So we are established in terms of legislation. So the Geoscience Act, I think that clearly sort of defines our mandate and the parameters in which we operate. It's quite a broad mandate, focused on research broadly, with the abilities to be able to collaborate and partner with others as well. So we've set out sort of our motto back home is that geoscience is the fulcrum for human development. So a lot of the things that we do, we really place that at the center of our work to be an enabler. Obviously, there's a lot of other contributors and other sort of cogs in the wheel that also makes everything move forward. But surely, from a geoscience perspective, we also have quite a significant role to play. And just to touch, obviously, our vision, which is also our impact statement, is to have a prosperous and transformed society enabled by geoscience solutions. So that's just some background. So I won't also spend too much details in terms of how we've organized ourselves and sort of to realize and maximize our impact, other than to say that we've divided our focus into what we've called thematic areas. So those are in terms of minerals and energy, geoscience for infrastructure and land use, health, groundwater, environment, innovation, which is one of those cross-cutting things that we all as scientists have to innovate, and then also geoscience diplomacy, which goes beyond the borders of South Africa as well. So I think maybe one important thing to mention here is being an entity of state, we have to align to national development imperatives. I think they are clearly outlined, our MTSF priorities, all of these policies of government. There had been quite a number of them. I think also to cite in our space, there's, for instance, the Just Energy Transition and the IRP, Integrated Resource Plan, the Minerals Exploration Strategy of South Africa. So there are all of these policies that we contribute to at some or another level, especially from a geoscience perspective in terms of research and the work that we do. So obviously we live in a ever-changing world. So we know, especially from the mining industry, it went through quite significant changes in the last couple of years, especially with the whole climate change debate and the just energy transition, climate mitigation action. All of these things had fundamentally started to shift the focus of especially from our context, geoscience and then exploration and mining activities subsequent to that, to a lot of minerals that, in the past we didn't really pay a lot of attention to. So this is purely to illustrate, how some of these changes had sort of shifted our focus to look at mineral occurrences and the geology that hosts them, that had been known to some extent, but didn't really receive a lot of attention because they weren't really prevalent in previous sort of economic cycles and technological development cycles. So we all know, obviously, the so-called critical minerals. There is a lot of people are referring to that, although I like to rather call them battery minerals or minerals of the future. So there's quite a lot of them that are required as we go to materials intensity, for instance, to develop these new technologies. So essentially, from a geoscience point of view, we have to basically find these minerals, understand, their sort of distribution, where they are localized in concentrations, and then the rest of the value chain follows onto that. So before I go into that, also to mention, especially from a socioeconomic and development perspective, I think we all know South Africa has got quite a rich history of mining activities, and it's for a long time been the backbone of our economy. I think we've diversified, obviously, in the past couple of decades, but still. Mining remains quite a substantial component of our economy. And this is just some infographics to sort of illustrate, the direct employment and sort of contributions to the GDP. But what I want to focus on is this snippet from the Minerals Council fact sheet that they've had as a case study for one of the junior exploration companies in South Africa. And just the principle of how, when you go from exploration stages of a mineral project into construction and then ultimately into mining. So there's across the board from revenue in terms of tax, the costs, job creation potential, quite significant increases as you move up this value chain. Ultimately, we want to get to a stage of mining. And I think as geoscientists, we look at the mineral potential side of things, but also the environmental stewardship side of things as well. Groundwater infrastructure development, I think all of these things are interrelated. But the principle I wanted to make is just from exploration to mining, there's a significant increase in across the board in the socioeconomic benefits. But all of this starts ultimately with geology and, to find these minerals that we need. So this is basically to illustrate the same thing. So we all know this mining or mineral development value chain, as it's known, as you go from exploration activities all the way into mine production and beneficiation ultimately. So as a Council for Geoscience, we generally function in the minerals exploration space at the very early stages of this. So we've organized ourselves to contribute to what we call pre-competitive geoscience data and information. And what that is ultimately geological information that we collect and also that's under our custodianship to ultimately de-risk exploration projects and activities way at the beginning of potential development projects. So at the end of the day, when you start de-risking exploration activities at the initial stages, The hope is that we can start accelerating the more detailed exploration activities that the private sector typically does in the country, and ultimately to lead to new mineral discoveries ultimately. So that's the ultimate intent, and this is aligned to the DMRE's strategic intent as well to, as a country, as South Africa, to also secure 5% of the global exploration expenditure. So we know that the geology of South Africa is very good quality geology, so to speak, to put it plainly. But current exploration activities are not commensurate with the quality of geology that we have. So we really try to make information available and undertake research specifically to de-risk some of these possible projects. So some of the ways that we do this, I'll just go through maybe some examples briefly. But fundamentally, one of the backbone things that we do is to improve the on and offshore geoscience mapping coverage of South Africa. So the country had obviously been mapped at different scales. I can illustrate it in this slide. So we've done 1 in 1 million scale, which is very broad geology. Then we went to a 250,000 scale, which is a bit more detailed. But ultimately, what we need for the initial stages of exploration activities is what we call a 1 in 50,000 scale mapping. So I think it's quite clear you can see the level of detail improving from the one scale to the scale that we are basically covering the country at the moment. So it's quite a big endeavor, and this forms the backbone of, as I've mentioned, a lot of the other work that we do as well. So not only mineral exploration activities and the oil and gas industry and all of this, but also for infrastructure development, food security, hydrogeology, geohazards, all of these things that have societal benefit or potential societal impact. And that's the main sort of baseline point of departure that we work from. So currently we've covered about 13% of the country. So it's obviously a long-term project that we've started a couple of years back. Then just to illustrate more than anything else, but what we do is the geoscience, fundamental geoscience mapping forms one component of a lot of other things that we do as well. So these are just some examples of geophysical surveys, both airborne and ground geophysics, geochemistry work. There's a lot of conceptual models and things published in literature around mineral occurrences. So what we do then is to take all of these different data sets and start integrating them to understand regional mineral systems in the main from a exploration perspective. And this is basically to try and fingerprint, potential future occurrences. And then hopefully, exploration companies can also then pick up some of this geoscience information to streamline the process and gain some grounds in terms of resuscitating the mining industry in the main, especially from a exploration point. So this is one example of that. So displayed on this image is what we call pegmatites. So these are rock types that are known to host lithium, and we know lithium is quite high in demand currently, especially for the electric vehicles and for batteries. So there's been a lot of work, for instance, done in the 60s and 70s by the former Geological Survey. But during that time, it didn't really attract much attention because batteries wasn't such a big thing then. But now with our new, more detailed approach and reassessing historical information with new data, we've actually more than doubled the previous known occurrence of this pegmatite body in the Northern Cape province. And subsequent to that, it seems like there's been a lot of exploration activity that had been attracted to this area on the basis of this information that we've made available after doing the research. In fact, I believe there are actually some mines that are also opening specifically for lithium in that region. So that's just a direct illustration of how we are contributing to this 5% of the global exploration expenditure and also our energy security in the country. Then another big thing to mention is obviously around the talks of the climate change mitigation. So one of the other things we've been looking at is carbon capture, storage, and utilization. So this is also quite novel research from a geoscience perspective, where we want to sequestrate CO2, anthropogenic CO2, in a geological depository. So ultimately, we are doing the geological characterization of this, which will be followed by pilot scale injection to test this whole concept. So we are still busy with this work. It's nearing its final stages of characterization. But then ultimately this could potentially contribute quite significantly to our just energy transition and the climate change trajectory that we are taking as a country. And also to mention, this would be the first CCUS project in the continent if this is concluded. So we are very hopeful and actually quite optimistic about this at the current point. And we've specifically also looked at the economics of the pilot stages of this work to have it closer to point source emitters, for instance, in the Mpumalanga region. Then second last example is, for instance, the integration of data sets that we do as well in terms of groundwater risk studies. So this is both for water supply purposes as well as for mine affected waters, typically acid mine drainage type water. So we do quite a bit of work around that as well to compile, for as an example, these groundwater risk maps to indicate where water sources could be potentially vulnerable, that might need additional attention, and that's typically where other role players would also come in. For instance, Department of Water and Sanitation, environmental affairs, fisheries and forestry, and private sector companies as well. And then lastly, by means of example, I think we've all seen the devastation that geohazards can cause. I think in the media it's been quite evident. Sinkholes, earthquakes, landslides in the main. I think those are the big three that we have in South Africa. And we all recall the devastation that the flooding and landslides caused in eThekwini and the Eastern Cape province as well last year. I think last estimations was reported around 25 billion rands worth of damage. So from a geoscience perspective, what we do is to assess these geohazards, to define and characterize their sort of potential for occurrence, and the intention is then for that to be used by local authorities or any developers to reinforce safe and sustainable land use practices. So this is also one of that nexus points where geoscience then also finds expression, for instance, in potentially in policy and bylaws and best practice guidelines. I think that's an easy one. And then lastly, I think one of the key things we've noticed is, I think as geoscientists or scientists broadly, we are very good at communicating science to the scientific community. But we've actually realized that we needed to change our approach. That's important. We need to do that as well. But to change our approach to also make science more sort of approachable and understandable to the broader and general public as well. because at the end of the day, as a public entity, we serve all the people of the country. And then obviously the scientific side of things also that will have its specific applications. So we've launched our digital platforms to make data and information available and accessible. Those that are not subject to any confidentialities or that are still work in process. So this is mainly part of our mandate to be the custodian of all geoscientific data and information in the country. And then as a concluding remark, what I wanted to mention as well, so obviously us being a public entity, I think in the world that we live in today, no one and nothing exists in a vacuum. So I think looking forward, more and more collaboration will become quite significant and important. I think there's a lot of expertise across the board, especially if you start looking at entire value chains. I think where we can really leverage each other's expertise and strengths. There's obviously the private sector and then tertiary education institutions, higher education institutions as well. Yeah, so I wanted to finish off with that. It's quite difficult to put everything that you do into a 15-minute talk. But I hope that could give some sort of indication in terms of how our focus aligns to contributing to socioeconomic development in the country. Thank you. Thank you very much.